Good evening. My name is Joshua Stewart. I am the class of 2018 and Assistant Director for UVA Clubs and Global Engagement, as well as the moderator for tonight's event. Welcome to the UVA Clubs virtual discussion with Dean Greg Roberts and Scott Miller, Director of Financial Aid at the University of Virginia. This online discussion will address how our students' high school year has been disrupted and how they can prepare over the summer for the college application process. Again, thank you all for joining us, and we hope everyone is safe and well. 2 house rules. The chat function will be disabled. However, throughout the talk, please feel free to input any questions you have in the Q&A box, and we will get to them at the conclusion of this discussion. And now I'd like to introduce Dean Greg Roberts and Scott Miller. Dean Greg Roberts joined the UVA admissions staff as Associate Dean in August 2003, and in January of 2009, the university named Greg Roberts Dean of Admission. Before coming to the university, he served as the Associate Director of Admission at Georgetown University. He also held positions at Emory University. Scott Miller is the Director of Financial Aid. Scott has been with UVA since 2003 as well, and held many titles within the financial aid department, and has probably seen more things than we can possibly imagine. He will undoubtedly be able to answer many questions due to his 16 years at the university. And I hand it over to you all. Thanks for being here.
First of all, I want to thank you for coming out tonight. I know it's not always easy this late on the East Coast anyway. I feel like usually I'm winding down by about this time, but we had some ideas about this program about a month ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, because we're beginning to get a lot of questions about admission, as we typically do at this time of year, but the questions were obviously more geared towards the current day and the pandemic and how this is affecting students and families and the college application process itself. And so we reached out to engagement and offered to host a program like this after a pretty successful one last fall. My hunch is that there are a lot of questions. I think that college admission is a stressful and confusing process on a good day. And during a global pandemic, I don't even know how to describe it, but I know that there's a lot on your minds, and we're going to get to a lot of questions over the next hour or so that I hope will offer some practical and useful and helpful information, and at the very least give you some confidence as students and as families as you approach this really important and interesting and hopefully exciting process. So the first slide we're going to go to is a timeline. So our intent here is to touch on some basics at the outset. So I'll spend 5 or 10 minutes talking a little bit about admission, hand it over to my friend Scott, who's going to talk about financial aid, and then we'll leave most of the time for a Q&A. The reason we start with this timeline, I think, is because it gives you some sense of how a typical academic cycle or year in an admission office works. And as high school students, and as parents, I think you look towards that far right-hand side, which is more or less the time that we're living now. And if you think, right now there's a lot of uncertainty. You can look forward to a year from now when, as parents, you'll be relieved if for no other reason than this process is finished. And as students, probably for the very same reason, but hopefully by that point, you will you'll have found a home, a college home that you're excited about as you wrap up a productive and fun senior year. But to get started, I think we look to the left-hand column and advance even further beyond the screen. We started October 15 here because that is our early decision deadline. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of work and a lot of things that families are considering between May 19th, today, and these early deadlines that schools have in place. And we refer to this in the admission world as the search process, the college search process. And what's really fascinating about the time we're living now is that much of what we have done historically to recruit students, to reach out and identify students to encourage to apply to the university, has been completely turned on its head. And so as high school students, maybe you're a rising senior or a rising junior, often we will see tens of thousands of visitors to grounds between March and the end of August. And while we'll hope that families are able to visit the university over the course of the summer, the time being, all of this is on hold. And I think that this makes your job a little bit more difficult because you learn so much from those college visits. I think as parents who attended the university or another school, you remember how impactful the college visit can be. It's, if nothing else, you develop an emotional connection or disconnection to a school by virtue of visiting. And now as students, particularly the seniors, you don't have the opportunity to visit. Some of you probably have never visited a college campus. And therefore, it puts you in a situation where you're trying to make some decisions about where to apply without the type of useful information that you need. And that makes it super hard. Fortunately, what this whole crisis has taught us is, as universities, is how to begin to interact with individuals, with students, with counselors, with parents virtually. And so I would encourage you for the time being to take advantage of what schools have to offer online. We have, for example, a really terrific virtual tour. We have just started hosting information sessions where you would register online as you would if you were coming, but you you hear from an admission officer as well as some students who offer their perspective. And we've tightened it up so it's not this long-winded virtual presentation, but it's a shorter period of time. And we embed some videos that give you at least a glimpse of what life is like for a student at UVA and answer some of those admission questions. So my suggestion would be that you take advantage, you cast a broad net, and you visit schools virtually as much as possible so that when you can actually spend some time at a university campus, whether it's this summer or fall or spring, you will have a better sense of what that institution offers. Now, when you look at this slide, I expect we'll probably address some questions about the admission plans. If you've been paying attention, we added an early decision plan this past cycle. It was our very first year. I'd be happy to talk about early decision and who might consider that option. But that is an earlier deadline, October 15th. The intent here is to evaluate applications through November and release the decisions in December. It's a binding program, so that means that if you determine that UVA is your top choice, then early decision might be a very good option for you. But if you are not sure, and maybe because you haven't visited as many schools as you normally would have, it's harder to make that clear delineation between your top choice and your second, third, or fourth, then early decision might not be the best plan for you this year. In that case, you could apply early action, which has a November 1st application deadline. We typically release the decisions somewhere around mid to late January. So it's an early notification, but it is not binding. So you keep your options open. It means that if you're admitted, you do not have to come, whereas early decision, that's the expectation. Finally, regular decision is a little bit later. It's after the new year. We read these applications throughout the course of the winter with the intent of releasing the decisions by April 1. And then all of the students in early action and regular decision would have to make their choice by the May 1st deadline. So in the next slide, we'll give you a sense of the programs, and I'll be very brief here. Most of you are somewhat familiar. You know, at colleges and universities, some you would simply apply to the school itself. At UVA, a larger school, a public institution, we have a variety of different schools, of course, and applicants would select the school to which they're most interested in. So perhaps you're someone who's interested in engineering and that might be your choice, or architecture, nursing, education, a little bit more specific programs. But if you're someone who's unsure at this point, you're not quite sure what you want to do in college, then you're probably going to be attracted to the College of Arts and Sciences, which is the largest division at Virginia. But the point is that when you do apply, you apply to a specific school, and our admission committees evaluate you within the context of that school. So in other words, you're not competing with your best friend who is applying as an engineer if you're an architect, for example. The offer rates, the admission offer rates are reasonably close. I wouldn't use this as a strategy, but it is important to do your homework and do your research to determine which school at the university is the one that excites you the most. So statistically, I hesitate sometimes to throw too many statistics out there because I think that you could read into them in ways that are probably not productive or healthy. We do have a pretty large applicant pool. It'll be very interesting, are unable to visit, as I've mentioned numerous times. But also it could be that students are interested in sticking a little bit more close to home, or at least within driving distance. So how that affects our international population or our West Coast applicants, it's hard to say. It is a little bit more difficult, as you can see from the numbers at the right, to be admitted from out of state versus in-state. And that's largely driven by the size of the applicant pool. More of our applicants apply from out of state. There are, after all, 49 different states and a lot of foreign countries, and there's one, Virginia. But also we are shooting for a class that has a blend of Virginians and non-Virginians, so that ultimately about 69% of the applicants, 69% of the student body at UVA come from outside of the Commonwealth, come from the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so it's a mathematical equation, if nothing else. But we can get into some of the nuances of the file review in just a moment, but this gives you some sense. The question I receive pretty frequently from legacy families is what does it mean to be a child of an alum? That is certainly a factor in our review. It is not the most important factor. I don't think you'd want it to be, but it is something that we pay attention to. Normally, the out-of-state students are offered admission at roughly twice the rate of non-legacies. So it's a fairly significant bump there. And then for Virginians, a 39% offer rate, we might have a 46 or 47% offer rate for the legacy students who are already benefiting from the less competitive Virginia review. And I say that loosely, less competitive. Next slide, please. So quickly, the heart of your application is going to be your high school transcript. And in a minute, when we go to the Q&A, my guess is there'll be a lot of questions about how we're going to evaluate the transcript in light of disruptions this year. Grading scales are different, grades are different. There's a lot going on that we're going to have to look very closely at as we evaluate applications. But in a nutshell, we're looking to see how you performed in your classes. We're looking at the strength of your schedule. We're looking at your grades. We're looking at these within the context of your high school. So because high schools are so very different with different grading scales and different weight and inflation, we can't compare one student from one school directly to a student at another school because the academic profile and the academic program is quite different. So we rely heavily on your school to offer us information that helps us examine or dissect the transcript. How many AP courses are offered? Do you offer international baccalaureate? Is 90 to 100 an A or 94 to 100? Is it a 4.0 scale or 100 point? All of these things are offered to us, and then our regional admission committees, who have some expertise in the areas of the Commonwealth or the country or the world, will be evaluating applicants from your area. As far as recommendations and essays, I think that the recommendations can be quite helpful, to be honest with you. I would urge you to be careful as you select the faculty members, the teachers who are going to submit who are going to write your recommendations. I think really we're looking to get an academic perspective that builds on what we think we already know in your high school transcript. It is not important to get a recommendation from a teacher whose class you made an A necessarily. It's the teacher that knows you the best, who can talk to us and provide, helpful information about who you are as an academic student. Not just some 30,000-foot level of your academic performance in the classroom. The fact that you're prompt and you're on time and you turn in your homework, these sorts of things. We would assume that. But we want to know how you engage other students in the classroom. Are you the type of student who elevates the conversation, or when the teacher's having a rough day and everyone's a little tired in class, are you the one that spurs conversation? Do you help the other students who might be struggling? I mean, these are the types of anecdotes and stories that can really bring life to the numbers that we see on the transcript. The essays are the opportunity for you to tell your story. This is a process that is not driven by a formula. We are human beings that are reading the applications, and we are doing our best to get to know you as an academic student, of course, but also as a person. And the essays are a chance to tell us a little bit about who you are and what's important to you. And I can provide lots of advice on the essays as we move forward, but they do support everything else. We don't, with the exception, I believe, of the transcript, there is no weight given to various portions of the application. So for example, we don't give more weight to the essay than the recommendation. Everything is looked at together comprehensively to paint a picture or form a view of who you are. And, these are objective decisions to some degree, but they're also subjective as well. We have a tremendous amount of experience on our staff. And I'm really proud of the work that our team does over the course of the winter, trying to make some really difficult decisions at times and offer real thoughtful and personal and comprehensive evaluations. Activities, and this is the second to last slide, so don't lose faith. Activities, again, give us a sense of what you enjoy. I think that sometimes when you see an application, the common application is what we use, often there's an extracurricular page, and there's space for you to insert what you do outside of the classroom. And the inclination is to fill all the spots. You don't want to leave anything blank. And that's really not true. We're looking for depth of experience. We're not looking at, students who have signed up for a variety of clubs of which they're minimally involved. We want to know what you like. And it could be a school-sponsored activity. You're in the marching band, you're involved with student government, athletics, the robotics, on and on and on. But you also might be someone who's not as super involved in school stuff, but you also have other passions and interests. An artist who does most of their work, at home outside of the studio at work, or someone who designs their own clothes, or someone who has a part-time job or volunteers outside of school. So think about what it is you like to do. Think about how you've been involved and share that with us, because schools want to see not only students who can succeed academically and contribute to the academic environment at a college. They want to see students who can contribute to the social fabric of the place, life in the resident halls, who might be a tour guide, who might be, involved with an a cappella singing group. I mean, colleges are these rich, vibrant, fun places. Most of your time is spent outside of the classroom. And so we're looking for a match there, and students who really bring energy and enthusiasm to our university. Lastly, and you've been very patient, I must say. Testing. My guess is there are going to be a lot of questions about standardized testing, given the fact that the SAT and the ACT were canceled during the spring and really throughout the summer. And I'm going to address that in the Q&A. But we find that testing can be a helpful piece of information for us to include in the application review. Research has shown that standardized testing with the high school transcript is the best indicator of college success. It's better than either one of those individually, right? With that said, it is a flawed tool. Research has shown that it is highly correlated to family income. And so we have to be careful with it, to be honest with you. We have to look at the context when we're considering the standardized test scores. For example, a student who is a first-generation college student in a single-parent home where money's tight probably is not going to be testing as high as maybe a student whose parents have advanced degrees and high-paying jobs, because they can't take SAT prep classes and these sorts of things. So we realize all of this, and we think about this when we're evaluating the testing. But I do think it's a useful tool as it always has been used historically. There are concerns about equity now that testing has been canceled, and some of this has moved online. Many of you probably taken some AP classes. My son took one today, for example. But I'll save that for the Q&A, because I think a lot of the coronavirus questions I can address there together. But I hope this is at least provides us with a foundation for the conversations that's going to be taking for the rest of the session. I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page before we got into some of the nuances of the process as we see it occurring over the next year or so. So with that said, I'll back off. I will put myself on mute, and Scott's going to take over and tell you a little bit about need and merit-based financial aid scholarships. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Greg. So Greg's done a great job of kind of giving you the background of being admitted to the university. And so you can see there that we are need blind in the admission process. So we don't provide any income information, financial information to admission during that admission process. But after you are admitted to the university, we are committed to meeting 100% of demonstrated financial need using a combination of scholarships, grants, work study, and loans to do that. And you can see up there on the cost of attendance, it's kind of the starting point for us in financial aid, the in-state and the out-of-state. These amounts here are for the College of Arts and Sciences and the Curry School. The amounts are different for the other 5 schools: engineering and architecture, McIntyre, Baton, and nursing. And here in Student Financial Services, we do again focus on need-based aid. We don't have merit scholarships. And so in order to qualify for the need-based aid, we need to fill out 2 applications. One of those is the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA form, and that will determine your eligibility for federal aid like the Pell Grant or work study or direct loans. And then we use the CSS profile from the College Board to determine our institutional aid. To get a sense of whether you would qualify for any need-based aid, you can go to a couple of calculators out on our website. One of them is the net price calculator, but the one that we would prefer you use is something called My Intuition. There's about 67 schools around the country that use My Intuition, and you answer 6 questions about your finances and your household. And it will give you kind of a best estimate if you qualify for need-based aid, and a low and a high estimate as well. Although we don't provide merit-based scholarships in SFS, Student Financial Services, I did want to provide some other resources just so that you're aware of some non-need resources around the university. Many of you attended the university, and through the Alumni Association, they do have a legacy scholarship. That application becomes available on February 1st each spring, and then the deadline is April the 11th. Through the Jefferson Scholars Foundation, the university or the foundation itself provides roughly 32 to 36 full cost of attendance 4-year scholarships to the university. And it would be best for you to check with your school counselor about starting that application process. The nomination period begins on August 1st, in a few months, and the deadline is around the first part of December. And I've included the website there of the Jefferson Scholars Foundation, so you can go out and check out the scholarship process through their organization. We also have on our website, under the sfs.virginia.edu, a scholarships page that just outlines resources around the university that are outside of student financial services that are typically non-need based. And you can check those out to find out about other scholarship resources at UVA.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Now we're going to move into the Q&A to answer you all's questions that you have. We have quite a few, so hopefully we can get to all of these. The first question comes from Christy. What are your thoughts? This is for Dean Roberts. What are your thoughts about how the number of seniors who are delaying admission for a year may affect admissions for current juniors?
That's a very, very good question. And it's one we've heard quite a bit. In fact, I've read a decent amount about this in various publications nationally. To alleviate your concerns, at least for the time being, the number of gap year requests or deferral requests at this point for this class, the one that's supposed to start in the fall, is no different than previous years. We've had probably more questions about it, hence this question. I think if you could look at this probably from a few angles. There are some schools that do not permit students to take a gap year, for one. Two, those that do, I believe, are trying to balance sort of common sense and compassion with sort of financial realities, to be honest with you. I think that we're all cognizant of the challenges that families are facing. It could be that international students, for example, have difficulty obtaining a visa because the embassies are closed, or maybe there are travel restrictions, or maybe there's been a change in the financial situation over the course of the summer. There are all sorts of reasons why a student might request it this year, and they wouldn't have in previous years. So we want to be conscious of that. I think that at the moment, what we are doing is we have accepted some, approved some requests, but most of them we are holding until the July 1 deadline. And that's the deadline to submit your gap year request. And then we would see how many we have and what our capacity is. Your question about next year, it depends on the school's policy on gap years, whether they permit them or not, whether they're going to cap them, these sorts of things. Even if they don't, it could be that next year, schools are all have financial challenges now, and it could be that they decide to increase the class size next year to offset the loss of spots, so to speak, from the gap year kids, for example, or start offering, the gap year kids are allowed to come in January as opposed to wait and take the spot of the next class. So this is one of those questions where there's so much uncertainty at the moment. I can't, say for sure, but I would say that at the moment, that's not something that you're going to be able to control. I would try to avoid worrying about things you can't control. But my hope is that we're able to develop a system in place that's fair not only to the students that are supposed to enter this fall, but to the students who are applying to enter in 2021.
Great, thank you. Next question is by Alex. What is the plan for requiring the SAT/ACT for the class of 2021 and also the class for 2022?
Right. So, I mentioned our rationale behind the standardized testing and how we use them. And I think that if a school used the SAT as the most important factor, or if a school had a cutoff or a threshold that all admitted students had to exceed to be admitted, then you're not using the test in the way it was designed to be used. With that said, the concerns about the seniors, the rising seniors, you guys that are applying next year, is that there are approximately 1 million rising seniors who have not taken the SAT, who normally would have taken it in the spring or early summer. And it's not going to be available again until August at best. If schools open, high schools, the plan is to offer the SAT and the ACT, I expect, every month until January, which would give students time to submit the SAT prior to, even a couple times prior to some of the early deadlines. So what I've been reading, and when I talk to my friends and colleagues at other schools, there are more and more schools that have adopted a test optional approach. I read about them every day. A lot of the top 25 U.S. news schools, the Ivies, Stanford, Georgetown, Duke, you name them, have not changed policies. We have not at this point. My main concern about the SAT is if we reach the end of the summer and there's still uncertainty about whether or not high schools can offer the exam in high school, or even if students can get to high school, or if it's an online option. I'm just not sure it would be fair, because there are differences in internet capabilities. There are differences in home environments. Some have 8 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment, and it's going to be chaotic, very difficult to take an exam in that environment, as opposed to if you had a nice quiet spot. So the long-winded answer is we are monitoring this. We're having some serious discussions about how we would handle various scenarios. For the Virginians and for all of you, William and Mary announced recently that they are moving to test optional for 3 years. So some are moving to a 3-year option. Others are doing it just for 1 year. So the answer at the moment is we require the SAT or the ACT and the TOEFL for international students. We will make an announcement as soon as, if there is a change, as soon as possible, and certainly before the first test is administered, if there is a change.
Great. Mr. Miller, I believe this one is for you. From Malia, hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Will the pandemic affect how many merit scholarships you will be offering?
So as I mentioned earlier, at UVA, we don't have a merit scholarship program specifically. And so everything is need-based aid through Student Financial Services. The university right now is still committed to meeting 100% of need. We're one of only 2 public universities in the country that do that. So our students for fall of 2021, the tax return that will be used for those applications, for the aid applications, will be the 2019 tax return. And we do know that, we don't know what the fall of 21 is going to be like, or what parents' income will be for 21 as compared to 19. We do know that this year we do have families, it was based on the 2018 tax return, and 2020 for some families is looking a lot different income-wise. And so, we are working with families on appeals and to be able to look at the changes in their income as we head into the fall. But we are awarding need-based scholarships, so there is not an impact because we don't do the merit-based scholarships.
Perfect. Thank you. Dean Roberts, this is for you, I believe. Have you considered pushing the October 15th deadline back, given a large amount of students that may not have had a chance to visit grounds by this time?
That's a very good question. That we are considering deadlines. I think that as particularly if say we retain standardized testing, then you have to start looking at deadlines, because these early programs are pretty darn early. Given the fact that you might be taking the SAT for the first time in September, it could be with standardized testing that students, it does level the playing field, perhaps, in the sense that students are probably not taking it 4 or 5 times. Most of students are taking it once or twice at best. But yeah, we are having conversations about really everything. The summer is a time that admission offices spend the appropriate amount of time analyzing the year that passed and looking at policies to see if we can improve things or need to change things. And we're just now finishing up for this enrolling class. And usually we'd start to turn our attention to the next class right around this late May, early June window. So discussions are ongoing, and we'll announce any changes in a short period of time, I expect.
And a follow-up question, what percentage, this is by David LeBlanc, what percentage of the first year class is typically filled by early action, early decision?
So I'd have to look for certain this year. I haven't, to be honest with you, spent a whole lot of time digging into the numbers and the data. I do know the early numbers. Most of the students that we admit and most of the students that we enroll apply early action. This year, for example, we admitted, we had, if I recall, maybe 2,200 early decision applicants. Don't quote me, because it was over 2,000, but it wasn't 2,500. It was somewhere in the 2 range. And about 750 students were admitted. Almost all of them chose to enroll, as we would hope and expect. So in a class of 3748, 750 students is relatively small. Again, this was our first time with early decision. With early action, the vast majority of them came there. And then we had a smaller number, regular decision, probably exceeded early decision, but wasn't nearly as large as early action. Most students apply early action. So you have this hump, you have smaller pools, smaller numbers on the ends, and the early action is attractive because it gives you an early notification without having to commit at that particular time.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Miller, this one is for you, I believe. If a student wants to accept an early action offer, will there be any information available at that point for financial aid?
Yes, there will be. So we set some, even though we have a March 1 overall deadline for financial aid, we do have some priority dates prior to early decision, and one prior to early action, and one prior to regular decision. So if students want to get their applications into us earlier for those priority dates, then we will try to have a financial aid award out to them right after the admission decision goes out. And that way, especially on the early decision and the early action students, they've got a much longer period of time to be able to review their financial aid award, compare with other schools, but they still have the May 1 deadline to make a deposit. And likewise with the regular decision students, they'll find out just before April 1. And again, if they turned everything in by the March 1 date, we'll try to have an award to them by that time as well.
Great. There have been a lot of questions talking about the legacy program. Do siblings count? Do grandparents count? So Dean Roberts, if you and Scott speak on both ends of that, financially and admissions-wise, just that whole process again, sort of what qualifies for legacy.
So a legacy student is a student whose parent or guardian or step parent graduated from UVA. It does not include grandparents, nor does it include siblings. So that's the easy answer. You know, we're conscious of family ties to some degree, but a legacy by definition is the child of a graduate of UVA. So it could be the law school. It doesn't have to be undergrad. And keep in mind, it does not include folks who did their residency here, for example, but it is the parents.
Great. And then we have a question about the letter grade over a pass. So does UVA prefer a letter grade over pass? And then a lot of questions have asked about pass fail due to COVID.
Yeah, that's the question that I anticipated, to be honest with you. And you know, it's funny. There are so many different approaches to this based on high school and county. And you know, our job is to try to get a sense of what's happening at an individual school. And my fear sometimes is that families are comparing their child at one school to a student or a friend or someone who's at a school down the street that's in a different county or what have you. And it's really like apples to oranges. I mean, I've seen, if you take, for example, you know, Montgomery County, Maryland, suburban DC, and Fairfax County, suburban Virginia, DC, you know, similar to some degree in terms of, you know, these are very good school systems. I see a lot of IB in international baccalaureate programs in Maryland, more so than in Virginia, which tends to be a little bit more AP. But the grading scales, you know, are different, but at least the weight is very different. So, you know, the top student at one school, you know, might have a 4.4, and at another might have a 4.8, but they're both the top student. There's no difference between them. And so, you know, I would stay away from, you know, I wouldn't get too caught up in GPAs. The reason I mention all that is because how schools handle this spring is going to affect the GPAs. And, you know, I fear that students feel they'll be disadvantaged because their school system moves to a pass-fail and they don't get the benefit of the weight that's offered. You know, if you make an A in an AP class, instead of having a 4.0, that would be a 4.4. And so they're like, wow, you know, my GPA is taking a hit because we moved to pass-fail. We recognize this. The schools are going to go out of their way to describe how they approach the spring. Something else, obviously, that you cannot control. I would not worry about it. But my guess is that we're going to see a large number of schools, particularly the publics, who have moved to some variation of a pass-fail. And, you know, our job really is to get an idea of what, you know, your academic profile is without that. Does it make it easier for us? No, it doesn't. It makes it harder because, you know, a pass-fail, you could be a student who tanked in your junior year and have straight C's when you used to have A's in 9th and 10th grade, but it won't be reflected in the pass-fail because you have a bunch of P's. You know, likewise, a student who had straight A's in a bunch of AP courses probably feels disadvantaged by a pass-fail because you can't differentiate, you can't tell what the P is. Was it a D or was it an A? But, you know, this is going to be our life and our job. We open every file and spend considerable time trying to get an idea of what your academic performance means within the context of your school. And I can just assure you that we're going to spend a lot of time talking to counselors and schools and trying to understand what happened. Could be that schools start to provide quarter grades or, you know, mid-year grades earlier in the senior year, just to give us an additional piece of information. You know, this might be where the recommendations play an elevated role because your counselor could say, look, this is a student who, you know, was a very good student, one of our top students. You'll notice that where pass-fail has a bunch of passing grades in his junior year, her junior year, but at mid-year, that student had all A's, and we expect that student is and always has been a top student in school. So the type of anecdotal information provided by the high schools can also shed some light on, you know, who you are as a student at that school. We're going to do the best we can.
Perfect. Answered a lot of questions about the APs that were upcoming. So thank you for that. And then you spoke about letters of recommendation. Jessica has a question about that. How many letters do you recommend? And then how would you evaluate a recommendation from a counselor? And now what is the weight of a recommendation carrying now due to sort of what you spoke about with pass-fail classes?
Right. So when you say weight, it sort of implies there's a weight to begin with, and there isn't. I was using it sort of metaphorically. You're giving more attention to that information because it gives us a sense of it in a way it can begin to try to fill in the holes that might exist because of what happened in the spring for you. But keep in mind, who you are is you're the same person that you were, and I think the recommendations are going to show that. The fact that you missed several months of school is not going to change how those recommendations are written. I would say that sometimes they tell us what we think we already know, and sometimes they tell us something that we didn't know. The counselor recommendation gives us information about maybe you and your school or community, or perhaps even practical information. Say you're someone who is interested in taking AP chemistry, but it conflicted with your AP French class or any conflict. They might address that in there, so we wouldn't be wondering, well, why didn't they take an advanced level science class if they're applying to engineering? So I mean, there's a practical component to it. There's sort of a more of a personal component to it. Not all of you know your counselors extremely well. I think it's less likely at the big publics whose counselors have huge loads. Therefore, the other recommendations, could be more useful. Teacher recommendation, I would send 1, 2 would be tops. If you think about recommendations, you're probably going to go with a teacher who you think is going to write the best recommendation for you. If you don't, that would be a mistake. And think about if you're on your 3rd or 4th recommendation, they're 3rd or 4th for a reason. You didn't pick them as your top one. So they are, they might not know you quite as well as the others. So I would stick to 1 of each. If you had to go for a 3rd, we could live with it. We are reading a lot of applications. It's hard to read many recommendations. I would not send 7. It dilutes what's already there. That's a mistake. I would consider an extra recommendation if it was outside of either of those realms. If you're someone who volunteers a good bit and someone who, is your supervisor for Habitat for Humanity, and they could write about, your participation or your leadership in that organization, that might give us a different angle. More information that the teacher might not be able to share, nor the counselor, or a part-time job, or a coach, or maybe not a coach. That's probably less important, I think, sometimes than work. But maybe so use your judgment. Honestly, I just don't think that more is better, because it's usually not.
This is a question from Aaron for both of you all. What has the university learned from moving to remote learning? Or just remote in general?
Well, from the financial point of view, it's been quite an experience this spring. We had students who did not return after spring break, and we were issuing travel grants for students to be able to get home, and technology grants so that students could participate in online learning. But it's, it has made us think of different ways to be able to reach out to students and their parents, to be able to answer questions, think about some processes, things that we asked for that we could potentially change, or the methods of delivery could change. Our staffs are working from their homes, and, just our method of communication. We wouldn't be doing this event this evening probably if in this manner if without this situation. So there's a lot of things that we have learned.
Yeah, I'll share that. I'd have to agree. And I think for us, we spend a good portion of our fall traveling around the country and the world trying to meet you. And it's fairly unlikely that we'll be doing it, at least in the volume that we normally do. So we've learned a lot about how to, to connect with students and families virtually like this. And I think that, the university, I can't speak for the faculty, but I've been in meetings and I've heard some commentary. I think that, when all this happened in March, it was an incredibly quick turnaround to virtual learning. Mind-blowingly fast. It was about a week or 10 days where you're asking thousands of faculty members and tens of thousands of students to adopt an entirely new system. And so it's worked as well as you would hope, better than we would hope, but it's pretty basic. There's Zoom classrooms essentially. I think moving forward, there's a possibility that that schools will be using online learning in a variety of forms, even when everything is back to normal, but it'll be new and improved and enhanced. And I think those are some of the interesting conversations. How do you do this in a way that's not just spitting out information or replicating a classroom setting? How do you combine different types of, virtual experiences into one to make it a more effective means of sharing information and communicating? So I think that's one of the more, the positives that's come out of this situation.
Great. Sean Y asked, is there a list of scholarships my son can apply for, or are all of the UVA award scholarships recipients chosen by the school during the admissions process, such as Eccles, Jefferson, et cetera?
Well, some of those scholarships that you mentioned there, like Eccles doesn't necessarily have a scholarship component tied to it. Jefferson is awarded by the Jefferson Scholars Foundation. So it is an interview process and a nomination process. Here in Student Financial Services, we award the need-based scholarships based on financial need. A lot of those are funded by endowed scholarships. You can go out to the Alumni Association. You can see the list of scholarships that they have, and they have an application process for theirs. In Student Financial Services, we really don't have an application process. And then as students progress through their time at the university, some of the different schools themselves have scholarships, like Arts and Sciences has the Dean's Scholarships, and they do have an application process during students' second year at the university. So different scholarships have different requirements. And this is no different than right now when they're in high school. One of the things I would suggest is they start looking at foundations and community organizations and check out those kind of non-university scholarship opportunities before they come to the university. The main thing is if they have an interest, be sure and read all of the information about it and find out what the requirements are ahead of time.
Wonderful. Another question for you, Scott. If you're from a divorced family, do you fill out one financial aid form with both parents' information, but more information on how would you go about filling out the financial aid form?
Sure. So when the student begins completing the CSS profile with the College Board, one of the first questions is for them to tell about their family, and they tell about their biological parents and whether the parents are married or divorced or separated. And if they are divorced or separated, it will ask the student to provide the name and the email of the non-custodial parent. And so, yes, we would receive 2 profiles from parents in those situations.
Perfect. Then we have a question from Trip. Given a large number of cancellations of activities this summer, what are the best ways for students to make use of this newfound free time so that it can benefit them for applying to college?
Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it? I have a rising junior, and he had several plans that have been disrupted. And I know everyone's wondering what they're going to do with their children for the next several months. But I think the main thing, I want people have got to take care of themselves and each other. I think that this school stuff is important, but I think you've got to stay, healthy. I mean, I read an article not too long ago about a dean at another school, and I can't recall where it was from. And, she said, take this time to do various things like, learn to play the guitar and learn another language or volunteer. There are those sorts of things if you're creative that you can do. My son's an artist, and he's in heaven. He loves nothing more than being in his room and working on his art, right? But those formal programs are less likely to occur, and jobs, if you're hoping to work, to make some money and or do an internship or these travel, it's going to be hard. I think that some schools are going to be adopting more summer work given what's lacking in the spring, maybe starting earlier perhaps, reading, keeping your mind sharp, these sorts of things. So I wish I had some great advice, and if you have some, send them to me, because I have a teenager too, and I have a hard time imagining. We've done well for the last for the last 2 months, but thinking about 3 more months it's hard to get your head around. So the main thing is just take care of yourself and be smart and be healthy, and everything academically for college will take care of itself eventually.
Great. This question actually is a very interesting one, seeing that I was a transfer student. Could you talk about the requirements to transfer to UVA from another college, from Jai?
Sure. We have really our main transfer period is for the fall. So in fact, we just released transfer decisions last Friday, and we normally bring in 650 transfer students. I think on paper, the transfer in the first year process in terms of selectivity level is not terribly different. With that said, I don't think the transfer pool is quite as deep. I know it's not as big. And so really what we're looking for the transfer students, who, by the way, can come in after 1 year at another school or 2, but they still need to at least complete 1 full year somewhere else, allowing them to spend 3 years on grounds or possibly only 2 if they come later. We're looking at their grades and the coursework in college. And the one mistake I think students make sometimes is that they take courses that don't really connect with courses that they would take here. So you might be a student, for example, who has maintained really exceptional grades at another school, maybe even at a very, very well-known and prestigious school, who is selective on the front end as it is. But if you're taking a bunch of communications courses, and we don't offer communications, it's going to be very difficult to offer you admission. So, if you're applying to the engineering school, we have certain expectations of the types of classes students need to take. So we have all of this information online, but it's a balance between, grades, A's and B's in your year or 2 at another school, and your courses. Lastly, I'll say that we require your high school transcript, but I would say it's more important for those that are coming after 1 year of college, because by the time we evaluate your application in May, we normally don't have your spring grades from college. So in a sense, we're only looking at your fall freshman year. That's not a lot. So we're looking at your high school record of 4 years and that 1 semester of first year. Now, as you move to the next group, those that have finished their second year with the intent to come as a third-year student at Virginia, at that point, we're looking mostly at your college work there. And again, I think students that have A's and B's are by and large pretty strong candidates.
Perfect. And then on that note, how do you anticipate the VCCS Guaranteed Admissions Program will be impacted?
I haven't thought about that. I'm not sure it will, at least next year, other than the fact that if we find that, due to financial reasons or travel, more students are opting for community college for a year or 2, then you might expect more community college students to enter the pipeline which might find their way to us eventually. About half of our students are community college students, half of our transfer students. So it's a very good partnership with the community college in the state of Virginia. But I'm trying to figure out, I was just thinking how it would impact it. And I can't come up with anything more concrete at the moment. If I had more time to think of it, maybe, but I'm not sure that's going to be quite as impacted, other than back to the grades, spring grades, being pass, fail, that sort of thing for any student is going to be a little bit different for us.
Yeah. And then 2 questions for you, Scott. How do you apply to be an ECHL Scholar, or can you apply for being an ECHL Scholar, Jefferson Scholar? And then do out-of-state applicants still qualify for aid and scholarships?
Greg, I'll let you take that ECHLs in just a moment, but for the out-of-state, it's the same process. The students fill out the FAFSA and the profile, and we look at the family contributions, subtract that from the cost of attendance to get demonstrated financial need, and then we're meeting that need 100% for eligible students, and that includes our in-state population as well as the eligible out-of-state. We don't provide need-based aid to international students.
I'll take the ECHLs. And by the way, I know I have a ghost in this house because my light keeps going off. That's why I had to get out a moment ago. So if it goes completely black, I'll still be here to speak, but we have a friendly ghost that lives here. The ECHLs scholarship and the Rodman scholars. Rodman is sort of the ECHLs version for the engineering school. And the third, honors program. These are all honors programs as opposed to scholarships. I think people get confused because it's scholars. They're called the ECHLs scholars, the Rodman scholars, the college science scholars. They are scholars, clearly, but it's a program of study, or it's a program as opposed to a financial scholarship. There's no money tied to these things. There are certainly some enhancements, and these are often our top applicants from each of these 2 schools, the college and the e-school. But those decisions are made by the admission committee, and we often will, we changed it up a little bit this year in that we made those decisions more towards the spring as opposed to after each cycle. In other words, making ECHLs, Rodman, CSS, or college science scholars offers after early decision, after regular decision, after early action. We did them all kind of towards the same time in the spring. So anyway, those are evaluated by the admission office, and we would release those decisions maybe 6 weeks before you have to make a decision about enrolling, which would be mid-March, roughly.
Great. And then we just have a few more questions before we end. Jenny asks, can students apply for early decision and early action since they don't find out about early decision acceptance until mid-December?
They cannot. The students would apply to one. And so, early decision, my advice on early decision is that if you've done your homework, if you've explored lots of schools and you've determined that UVA is by far and away where you want to go, and if any other school in the entire world offered you a full scholarship to go there free, you turn it down and go to UVA, then early decision's a good call. If not, then I'd apply early action, because then you get the early notification, albeit not in December, like we release early decision in January, a month later, but it's an early notification. You can be admitted and then enjoy the rest of your senior year, but you're not committed. Most students who have financial need would not apply early decision. Scott and his team will offer financial aid packages, but you won't be able to compare those packages because you're applying to one school. And when you're admitted, after Scott gives you your aid award, you have to cancel all your other applications. So you can't compare. And that's a pretty big deal for families who have some financial questions. So more would apply early action or regular decision. If your early decision and early action and you are not admitted, we could deny you Okay, that isn't one of the decisions that we render with those two plans. Or we could defer your application, which means we push it into the regular decision pool and read you again in the spring with the regular decision students and give you a final decision by April 1st. So it's not necessarily all or nothing with those two plans, but you can't apply early action, early decision. You need to apply to one.
Fantastic. We have a Common App question. It says, what are your thoughts on how students should use the new COVID-19 question on the Common App? Only if there is an out of ordinary impact on their performance or personal life, or should all students fill it out?
I wish I could answer that, and I wish I could tell you what the COVID-19 question is. I should probably know. I haven't had a chance to look at the new Common App, and we haven't even submitted ours. It's available August 1st. Normally, what I thought you were going to ask me is should you write about COVID-19 in the essay? And that's your call, but it's keep in mind that it's probably it's impacting everyone, and it might be a pretty popular topic. Doesn't mean you can't write about it well, but it's harder when everybody's writing about the same topic. But so I don't know what the question is. I don't know how they framed that on the Common App. I'd have to do some homework there. I apologize. I'm not quite done with the entering class yet, but slowly making that transition.
Perfect. And then last question is going to be on the cap on gap year. Is there going to be any cap on the gap year for incoming?
We're still having conversations about the gap year. I'm encouraged that so few students. First of all, I like the gap year. I think gap years. I hope my son takes a gap year. I think that the type of growth that it can occur between the senior year in high school and the first year of college, it can be huge. I remember myself. I remember when I was an 18-year-old going to college. I should have taken a gap year. I wasn't mature enough to really fully explore and take advantage of what college has to offer. I think you can learn a ton and get an understanding of who you are and who you want to be. And maybe, it influences your worldview. I don't know. But there are all sorts of great gap year programs, many of which are not the ones you design yourself. You could work at a gas station for a year and get great life experience, take a gap year. So I like gap years. Let me start there. I do think, however, that, this year right now, we have 20 students so far that have been approved for gap years, and we normally see 60. So I have not seen an increase. I hope we don't have to make that decision. But I do think that the next few months will be telling, and we're going to keep an eye on it. I can't answer definitively what we're going to do because we're still trying to figure everything out.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for tonight's discussion, and thank you all to those who watched at home. We hope this program has provided you with some insight on how to move forward during this unusual time that we are in. Please be sure to visit alumni.virginia.edu for more programming that you might be interested in. Thanks again, Dean Roberts and Mr. Scott Miller, and everyone have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure. Thank you.